In 189 silent years, only one letter was ever found nailed to the church door. A letter written in ink made from crushed bones and human ash. It simply read, "Do not wake the choir. They say if you hear them, you're already too late." Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there now? And, do you believe some places were never meant to be remembered? Wraithmoor is not on any current map. Even the older ones, those leather-bound archival charts locked away in British antiquarian vaults, offer only a smudge near the edge of a forgotten shire. A smear of ink, a hint of a hamlet that was, but is no longer. No postal code, no census, no parish records, no survivors. The land itself has tried to erase it. Roots overrun roads, ivy devours stone, and in the heart of this living erasure stands the church, St. Aerlin's, built in 1611, condemned in 1833, abandoned ever since, officially. But that word, abandoned, it lies, because stone remembers, blood remembers, and Wraithmoor never forgets. They say the church bells haven't rung in centuries. But 3 separate hikers, all strangers, all on different years, all found frost forming on their skin in mid-July, and each described the exact same sound. 7 chimes, low, hollow, calling something up, and then silence. None of them made it out of the region alive. The local archives in nearby Withercombe contain one final police report on Wraithmoor, filed in 1937 by an officer named Alric Mayborn. He was investigating the sudden disappearance of an entire archaeological survey team. The file was later sealed by royal decree, but not before one page leaked to a regional historian, a woman named Elira Venn. She lived alone, far from town, and kept the paper in a locked box behind her father's grandfather clock. Her journal, never published, described what she read on that page. They found 13 open graves behind the church, freshly disturbed, but no coffins, no bones, only salt and feathers. Thousands of feathers, all arranged in concentric circles. She also noted something else. The officer's final words were written hastily. The singing started at dusk. We are not alone in this valley. Then the ink breaks into a jagged, almost clawed line across the page, and stops. No body, no final report, only salt and silence. Let's go back. Back before the abandonment, back before the silence, back to when the church still breathed, when candles were lit and the choir sang. The Wraithmoor choir, that's what they called them. Children. Always children. Voices so hauntingly pure, they said birds fell silent when they sang. But there was one rule. The choir may never leave the church grounds. Not for festivals, not for visits, not even for funerals. Those who questioned the rule were called interrupters. Most of them moved away. The others stopped asking. But a letter from 1783, discovered in the private collection of the Dukesmoor estate, suggests something far darker. Penned by a visiting cleric named Thornwell Armitage, it was addressed to the Archbishop of Canterbury, never delivered. I have seen what should not sing. The choir, they do not blink. They do not rest. They do not breathe as children breathe. I fear they are kept warm beneath the nave. I fear they are fed. There is no love in that place, only command, only obedience. He concludes, burn it all, lest they learn to speak instead of sing. The altar at St. Aerlin's is not aligned to the east, as was tradition. It faces due north, toward the old hills. Local folklore refers to those hills as the kneeling ones, because from a distance, they resemble human forms bent in prayer. But beneath those hills lie caves. Caves where, centuries earlier, the early Celts buried their nameless gods, the ones they stopped speaking of after the Romans came. The exact term used in Druidic inscriptions, Doitean glor, the burning voice. Some historians interpret this as metaphor. Others, those who've studied the acoustics of the caves, suggest it may have referred to a literal, physical phenomenon. Sound that caused pain, sound that shaped matter, sound that controlled thought, sound that could possess. What we now suspect, and what no institution dares publish, is that St. Aerolin's church was not built atop Holy Land. It was built as a containment structure, an acoustic seal, a ritual boundary. The choir? Not performers, not children, but vessels, living keys in a harmony lock designed to keep something down, not forever, just long enough. The carvings on the church pews aren't just ornamental, they're ancient phonetic notations, vocal sigils, meant to be echoed, repeated, sung. Each melody locking a gate, each note keeping a door from opening. And the choir masters, they weren't priests, they were engineers of silence. But something failed. The year 1833. One cold spring night, after months of heavy rain, the valley trembled. Villagers reported a skyquake, a thunder without clouds. The church lights went out. The choir stopped. And from that night onward, no one who entered Wraithmoor ever came back. Yet the doors remain open, still, waiting. Inside, they say, it's always cold, even in the height of summer. And sometimes, if you walk too near, you'll hear singing, faint, beautiful, calling you by name. The villagers of Withercombe don't speak of Wraithmoor. Ask them directly, and you'll notice the shift. Eyes lower, voices tighten, hands fidget with crosses or old keys passed down through generations. They say nothing, but you will feel everything. Yet once, long ago, one man did speak. His name was Elias Hartley, a local watchmaker whose father had been part of the last generation to set foot inside St. Aerolin's before it was sealed. Elias, by all accounts, was meticulous, quiet, solitary, the kind of man who counted seconds the way others count sins. In 1966, he mailed a single package to the London Occult Archive. Inside it were three things: a set of hand-drawn floor plans of the church, an audio reel labelled Midnight Interior, and a note written in mirror script, only legible when held against flame. The note read, "The church shifts. It is not fixed. The nave breathes inward every 13th minute. The sacristy door has no hinge and no handle, yet it swings when the sun touches the altar stone. There is a voice in the walls, female, ancient, layered. She hums in reverse. You don't hear it until you listen." The reel was confiscated, but not before one technician listened. That man, Edric Bell, 24 years old, was institutionalized less than 2 weeks later. He never spoke again, but he scratched a single phrase into the wall of his cell, over and over. "I heard the name of the house, and it devoured its own." To understand the choir is to understand the songlines. Most assume the term belongs only to Aboriginal mythology, a sacred mapping of land through music. But there are older references, buried in Proto-Celtic bardic tradition, where songlines referred not to land, but to lineage, a way of keeping blood in tune. Each family in Wraithmoor, historians now believe, had a song assigned to them, a melodic signature encoded with what they called binding tones. This wasn't symbolic, it was control. Lullabies became obedience codes, hymns became intergenerational conditioning. And through it all, the choir absorbed every note. They were not children randomly chosen. They were bred, inbred, some suspect, by clerical eugenicists obsessed with purity of pitch. Each child selected not for talent, but for genetic resonance, each voice adding a layer to the seal beneath the church. But the question remains, what was being sealed? One surviving text offers a name, a single word etched in ash on vellum, found hidden in the back cover of a 17th century Wraithmoor psalter. Calthaith. No known translation, but its meaning is hinted at by what followed. She lies beneath the harmony, crowned in root and ruin, the mother who bore all voices and swallowed their tongues. They sang to hold her. But the 13th child will not sing. The 13th child. Every generation, the choir held 12 voices, but some whispered of a hidden 13th, unseen, unheard, unnamed, a null voice, born to break the song, to end the binding, a deliberate flaw, bred into the system by someone, perhaps a choirmaster who saw too much, or a mother who refused to offer her child to the stone. Whatever the truth, this 13th voice was not silence. It was unbinding, and it was born in 1833. March 12th, 1833. Rain, thunder. A rare blue comet was seen arcing over the valley at 2:12 a.m. The record books mention a choral failure, but a more accurate term is structural collapse of spiritual architecture. What truly happened that night can only be reconstructed through fragments. One such fragment, the diary of Mother Elspeth Maron, the church's caretaker. Only one page remains legible. I woke to hear them singing the wrong verse. No one ever taught them this key. It bends the candlelight. They stood in a circle, eyes open, mouths unblinking, and then she stepped forward, not one of the 12, pale as ash, no voice, no breath. But I heard her name, inside my skull, over and over, Calthaith, Calthaith, Calthaith. And then the bells began to melt. When the villagers reached the church at dawn, the doors had fused shut. The stained glass was no longer stained, but blackened, not painted, but scorched from within. Every image of Christ or saint had vanished, replaced with only one motif, a veiled woman, weeping inverted crosses from her eyes, standing atop a field of open mouths. There were no bodies, no songs, only silence, and a message carved into the inner lintel of the door, not in Latin, not in English, but in the lost angular script of the pre-Roman Celts. Sing no more. The mother listens. 10 months later, a team of 12 men arrived at Wraithmoor in unmarked carriages, led by Sir Aldrich Ashlock, a royal cryptologist and member of the Privy Vale, a now defunct division of British intelligence responsible for investigating paranormal destabilizations. Their objective? To classify, contain, and seal what remained. Ashlock's private journals, uncovered during a 1981 estate auction, detail the encounter in restrained but chilling language. The stones sang when we walked, not aloud but in memory. Every man heard a voice he loved and lost. The altar was wet, not with rain, but with milk, sour, curdled, and still warm. Something had been fed, or birthed. They made no effort to exorcise or reclaim the site. Instead, they constructed the 13th lintel, an invisible architectural ward made from a triangulation of soundproof iron rods and buried bone. They left behind no signs, no markings, only one instruction, encoded in the final Ashlock memo. Do not approach, do not listen, and above all, do not sing. But something remained unfinished. Even Ashlock knew it. In his final days, he wrote only this on the back of a cathedral blueprint. One voice remains unsilenced. She waits for the breath of a stranger to finish the chord. They scattered the bloodline. That was Ashlock's final directive. Every known descendant of the choir, living or unborn, was to be relocated under new names, new guardianship, far from the valley. Records were altered, church registries burned, baptismal rolls rewritten in invisible ink. They called it the Ashlock dispersion, a cleansing by distance. But not all blood can be diluted. Not all voices can be silenced by miles, because something was embedded within them. Not a memory, a frequency, an inherited resonance, carried like a parasite through the marrow, passed not through stories, but through vocal imprinting at birth. Each choir child, even generations removed, carried a fragment of the ancient chord, a seed of the final song. In 1972, an unlisted psychological facility in North Yorkshire recorded an unusual outbreak of glossolalia dissociation, a term they invented for what they could not name. 12 patients, unrelated, never met, began speaking in layered vocal tones. Not speaking, singing, each in a different pitch, each in a different rhythm. But when layered together in the audio lab, the tones harmonized. They formed a complete musical phrase, one that mirrored ancient vocal scales found inscribed beneath Wraithmoor's nave. The doctors dismissed it as coincidence. The technician who layered the tones, a man named Clive Hemmer, later dismembered his own tongue and wrote the words, "It's not a song, it's a command." We return to the null voice, the 13th child who did not sing. This child, unnamed in records, erased from parish documents, is hinted at in a 1901 folktale published under the pseudonym Mad Hag of the Hollow. Most dismissed the tale as rural madness, but read carefully, it contains details no outsider should have known. It speaks of a pale child born in the shadow of a veiled comet, a girl with no words on her tongue, but a scar shaped like a cleft note carved on her throat. She would sit in the ruins of the church after the collapse and hum in silence, mouth open, but no sound. And the forest grew quiet around her. Birds would fall from branches. Dogs would howl in circles. Mothers miscarried in her presence. The villagers called her chime dumb. But those who lingered near her long enough heard something deeper, not from her mouth, but from their own heads. A humming that became phrases. Phrases that weren't their own thoughts. Let me out. Let me breathe through you. The stone mouth thirsts. She vanished by age 9. No grave, no witness. Only a single tapestry found in the ashes of her family home, showing a woman in white, blindfolded, singing to a tree growing upside down. In 2006, a covert acoustics project conducted beneath Dartmoor, known only as Project Nocto, began testing subauditory linguistic residues. These were vocal patterns embedded within non-verbal human expressions, yawns, sighs, moans, even laughter. In their 7th month, they discovered something unexplainable. Out of 7,000 test subjects, 9 emitted identical microtones, below 20 Hz, when exposed to footage of decayed Gothic churches. All 9 shared no history, no location, no bloodline, except one. Each was a maternal descendant of the Wraithmoor evacuees. Each carried, buried deep in their brainstem, the dormant chord. They weren't just inheriting trauma, they were transmitting signal. Project Noctone was shut down after 3 researchers began speaking only in reversed Latin and tearing pages from the Book of Psalms, eating them before sleep. In 1884, during the demolition of a fire-damaged rectory in Wiltshire, a strange object was found locked beneath a staircase, wrapped in copper wire, sealed in wax. A choir book, bound in lambskin, the pages stitched with what appeared to be human sinew. The title was not in Latin, not in English, but a single glyph, matching the ancient sigil carved above the Wraithmoor altar stone. Inside, no lyrics, only notations, thousands of them, microtonal, notated in a forgotten solfège system, most too faint to read, but on the final page, scrawled in frantic bloody ink, "This is the map. The choir was never 12. The choir was always us. They sang to keep it under. Now we hum it unaware." The book was moved to an underground archive in Munich. In 1939, it was stolen by the Ahnenerbe, the Nazi occult division tasked with tracing ancestral memory through sound. The book was never recovered, but whispers claim it resurfaced in a private auction in Denmark in 2011, purchased anonymously for 5.4 million euros. What voice could be worth that much? Let's return one final time to the structure of St. Erlin's. In 2022, drone footage captured by an urban explorer revealed something long suspected, but never proven. The church's floor plan, when overlaid with ancient phonetic spiral notation, forms a throat, the nave as esophagus, the altar as tongue, the vaults as resonance chambers, and beneath it all, An ossuary not marked on any map, the glottal chamber, the place where sound was processed, not sung, not heard, extracted. They didn't build a church. They built a mouth, not to speak, but to swallow what could not be allowed to sing again. And the choir, not guardians, not lambs. They were sutures, living stitches holding the silence shut. But one stitch came undone, and the breath it held still waits. Most believe the Wraithmoor tragedy was a collapse, spontaneous, accidental, a product of superstition and bad weather. But those who've studied the Ashlock Black Ledger, the final sealed notebook of Sir Aldrich Ashlock, know differently. The truth was not collapse, it was invocation. Ashlock called it a precision rite of inverse resonance, a ritual mass conducted in reverse, using harmonic patterns derived not from scripture, but from bloodline-coded vocal keys. It took years to prepare, generations even. He wrote, "The final binding could not be eternal." The elders knew this. The choir was designed to decay, but at the right time, when enough of the world had forgotten, and one remembered just enough. That is the moment the veil thins. The mass was not to close the wound. It was to numb the threshold, to buy time. According to his ledgers, the black-veiled mass of 1833 was executed in complete darkness, without light, without names. Each choir member was dressed in burial linen. The priest wore no vestments, only a mirror around his neck. The purpose of the mirror, to reflect the voice back into the throat, to turn sound inward, to bind what cannot be killed. But the mirror cracked, and the 13th voice, the one not meant to exist, was present, not singing, just breathing. Ashlock concludes, "We sealed it, yes, but imperfectly. One note, the deepest, never harmonized. It resides not in stone, but in the lungs of the world, waiting to exhale." At first it appeared harmless. A 2021 experimental ambient album released by an anonymous artist under the name Nave 13. Just 12 tracks, each titled after a musical key. No lyrics, no melody, just deep, droning hums layered with occasional reverse tones. It gained underground popularity on forums for sleep music, sound therapy, and liminal listening, but the consequences were immediate. Listeners reported insomnia, followed by shared auditory hallucinations. A disproportionate number claimed to hear a female choir calling their name in the static. Others said they dreamed of a church they'd never seen, but could draw perfectly afterward. When the tracks were run through a spectral frequency analyzer by an audio forensics specialist, an alarming pattern emerged. The combined waveforms matched the floor plan of St. Erlin's. Precisely. But even more disturbing was the discovery that a 13th track was encoded in the negative space of the other 12, a phenomenon known as ghost harmonics. That hidden track, once isolated, played only one sound, a sustained inhale, long, endless, as if the world itself was gathering breath. To understand how this signal persists, we must revisit the concept of the inverted choir. This wasn't a group that sang together. They sang in opposition. Each voice countered another, creating harmonic interference patterns that prevented certain frequencies from manifesting. Think of it like pressure valves, arranged so carefully that no one sound could dominate. But the system had a flaw. Every generation, as the blood diluted and children grew farther from the original line, one tone weakened, one valve rusted, and the dissonance left behind created a cavity, a void in the composition, an opening. That opening became known as the undersong, a subharmonic tone that passes unheard beneath all human speech. Researchers at the European Centre for Psychoacoustic Memory Recovery found traces of the undersong in old nursery rhymes, liturgical chants, even lullabies across unrelated cultures. Its fingerprint is universal, not by coincidence, but by design. We are not singing it. We are being sung through. A declassified Vatican memorandum from 1954 marked Codex Corvus, Section 8, Anomalous Harmonies, makes reference to a banned theological principle, the doctrine of the hollow key. It proposes that beneath the architecture of creation is a kind of cosmic lock, one that holds back the original error. Not sin, not darkness, but sound. The first breath was not a gift. It was a scream softened by chords of mercy. According to the Codex, every holy structure, church, mosque, shrine, was unconsciously inspired by the mouth that held back the scream. But Wraithmoor was not inspired. It was reconstructed, an attempt to replicate the true architecture of containment, not spiritual, but acoustic. A choir, in this view, was never meant to worship. It was meant to hold the scream in place. But once again, the 13th voice disrupted the lock, and the hollow key, once silent, now begins to resonate. Since the release of the Nave 13 album, scattered cases of what some call auditory haunting have increased worldwide. Common symptoms include hearing one's own name during silence, sudden, overwhelming dread in old churches, even those never associated with Wraithmoor, children drawing spiral shapes with mouths at the center, pets refusing to enter rooms where certain frequencies are played. But the most telling sign, unconscious humming. One melody, always the same, hummed without awareness, always in a minor key, always 13 notes. It's not coming from us, it's coming through us. We are becoming the choir, and the breath behind us is no longer ours. Those closest to Wraithmoor's legacy, the descendants, the researchers, the listeners, all suffer the same fate, not in body, but in perception. It begins with subtle fractures, clocks ticking at half speed, mirrors reflecting actions 2 seconds too late, children responding to questions before they're asked. Then come the sounds, always just outside of hearing, metal dragging on stone, wet footsteps on dry floors, breath but not your own. One case stands out. Dr. Lyle Fenham, a British psychoacoustic linguist, was found in 2019 in his flat outside Manchester, seated in a soundproof room, surrounded by cassette tapes, each labelled by hand, not mine, still singing. Whisper copy. His final recording, now locked in the archives of the Royal Society, contains a sequence of reversed vocal tones. Played forward, they form one sentence, whispered by hundreds of voices in unison. The song you forgot is remembering you. Dr. Fenham's notes, recovered in fragments, suggest he had mapped the psycholinguistic degradation pattern of those exposed to the undersong. He called it vocal drift syndrome. Symptoms include the inability to speak one's native language without including unknown syllables, uncontrollable humming during moments of fear, hearing a second internal monologue, one that doesn't belong to the self. He ended his final page with this warning: it doesn't want to be heard, it wants to be echoed. Once you're humming, you're not alone anymore. Most assume the heart of Wraithmoor lies in the church itself, the nave, the altar, the choir's resting place. They are wrong. In 1997, a team of unauthorized crypt explorers using ground-penetrating radar discovered a cavity beneath the ossuary, a subchamber not marked on any blueprints or stone maps. Roughly 74 feet below ground, it is shaped not like a room, but like a larynx, with calcified folds, hollowed chambers of bone, and a windpipe shaft that leads nowhere, or perhaps everywhere. One of the explorers, a woman named Joelle Carr, wrote in her unpublished memoir, "The deeper we went, the less we heard each other. Not because we were quiet, but because the stone absorbed everything. It was like descending into a deaf god's throat. And then we reached the bottom. The floor wasn't stone, it was cartilage, fossilized, but warm. They found a single object, resting at the center. A tongue. Not symbolic. A literal tongue. Human in shape, 20 times the size, etched with thousands of glyphs in an unknown language. It pulsed once, then crumbled. 2 of the team vanished within the next month. 1 was found on the shores of the Thames, eyes gone, ears packed with salt. The other was never recovered. Only his notebook remained, soaked in seawater, bearing a single phrase written repeatedly. "She's forming words again." An ancient funerary rite from the Wraithmoor region, long banned by the church, described a process known as voice reclamation. It was believed that some corpses, especially those of the choir, still retained a fragment of their final song within the throat after death. If unearthed before the 13th day and placed beneath the altar, the corpse could speak backward truths for a single breath. In 1778, a heretical order calling themselves the Harmonics of Gethsemane attempted this ritual using the exhumed remains of a child named Elaine of Hollowbrook, one of the original choir. What they recorded that night was deemed so dangerous it was never transcribed, but a single sentence was later etched onto the prison wall of one of the monks before he tore his own jaw off with bare hands. The choir was not composed, it was remembered. We are singing what once sang through them. To speak the song is to lose the self, not metaphorically. Quite literally, your identity begins to invert. Victims of advanced vocal drift syndrome report feeling inhabited, not haunted, not possessed, but repurposed. Their mouths no longer theirs. Their names, fading. They don't become the choir, they become the instrument. And the music writes itself. In late 2023, a leaked Vatican surveillance file titled Chorus 9 appeared briefly on the dark web. It showed thermal footage of a sealed chapel in northern France, unused since the early 1800s. No entry points, no recent visitors, but inside, visible only on thermal scans, were 13 silhouettes, not moving, just standing, aligned perfectly in a choral semicircle. Their breath was visible, but the air in the chapel measured below freezing. The file was deleted within hours, the server destroyed, but one audio tech, who managed to download the audio signature before deletion, sent it to a network of occult researchers. The analysis revealed the sound contained no vocal cord vibration. The breath was not being expelled by lungs, it was being pulled through them, as if some greater lung, buried, unseen, had exhaled into them, and was now learning to speak through these stolen vessels. One researcher, in their final podcast before vanishing, said, "The breath is coming closer. It's no longer behind us. It's beside us, waiting for us to pause, to go quiet, to open our mouths, without thinking." You may believe that silence is safety, that if you do not hum, do not listen, do not believe, you cannot be touched. But silence is not absence. It is preparation. The song is not waiting to be heard. It is waiting to be completed. And you, your breath, your voice, your unthinking hums in moments of boredom, you may already be part of it. The signal is not something you find. It finds you through dreams, through lullabies, through broken rhythms you never noticed until now. And one day, you may stand still, listening. And from behind you, just at your ear, you'll hear your name sung beautifully, in a tone you've never heard before, but one you instantly recognize. Because it sounds exactly like you, before you were born, before you were named, before you were yours. You've felt it, haven't you? A tone under the silence, a melody you never learned but know by instinct. Some call it déjà vu, others call it psychosis. But the truth is far simpler. The choir is returning, not as children, not as ghosts, but as resonance. They are rebuilding themselves, not in flesh, but in sound, through dreams, through language, through rhythm. Every digital echo, every whispered recording, every repeated phrase is a recruitment. They do not need churches now. Your body is the altar, your breath the bellows, your mouth the chamber. In 2024, a group of sleep researchers in Oslo accidentally recorded a patient singing in two voices while in REM paralysis. One voice was hers. The other, impossibly, was an adult male voice, speaking in a dead Celtic tongue, not heard in over 1700 years. The voices spoke in counterpoint, a broken liturgy. The phrase, once translated, was chilling. We awaken in thirds. First the name, then the note, then the mouth. We are in the second phase now. The notes are forming. The names are returning. Across scattered reports, one figure repeats. A child. Pale. Silent. Appearing in places she shouldn't be. Desert ruins in Tunisia. An abandoned concert hall in Vienna. An off-limits Vatican archive beneath Castel Sant'Angelo. She does not speak. She does not blink. But wherever she appears, recording devices fail. Yet hours later, on those same devices, sound reappears. A single, fragile hum. Always the same key. Always 13 notes. Always ending one note short. Researchers now call her the vessel. They believe she is the harmonic heir of the 13th voice. Not possessed, not programmed, but tuned. Born as the key that ends the cycle. Not to silence the song, but to complete it. Because the Song of Wraithmoor was never a warning. It was a summons. Every church bell, every whisper, every note, it all leads here, to this unfinished melody that must be finished. Few now understand the true structure of St. Eirlin's church. It was not designed for people, it was designed for containment. Every angle, every buttress, every arch was modelled not on divine geometry, but on laryngeal anatomy. The entire church is a throat, a voice box, a complex resonator. Scholars who recently reconstructed the blueprint digitally found a horrifying truth. When you overlay the floor plan in reverse, then mirror it vertically, the shape is identical to the phonetic symbol for a glottal stop, the brief pause in the human voice where sound is suspended. That's what the church was, a pause, a global suspension, a breath held for centuries, not by stone, but by force of will. But now the architecture is decaying, cracks in the stone, leaching of iron, tension warping the timbre of the walls. The silence is weakening, and every second the song goes unfinished, the breath fills deeper. Let us revisit the prophecy, not written in ink, but in sequence. Every 77 years the signs return. 1779, the first hum recorded in a non-lexical tongue. The breath arrives. 1856, the failed ceiling, the veil torn. The note is lost. 1933, the first child heard speaking in harmonic dissonance. The name returns. 2010, all signs quiet. Then suddenly, everywhere, the hum resumes. The mouth opens. The last phrase remains. The mouth must speak. This is the third awakening, the final movement of the old song. The choir was never meant to exist forever. They were only ever a bridge, a harmonic stalling tactic, while the world rebuilt itself enough to hear again. But the vessel has been chosen. The undersong is no longer underneath, it is within. When she sings the final note, the sound won't echo. It will pierce, not through ears, but through identity. A frequency so pure it separates ego from flesh. You won't die. You'll just forget what you was. You will be part of it. The choir not as a group, but as a singularity. One tone, one will, one voice. Governments have tried. They deny this, but the evidence leaks. Audio censorship algorithms embedded in social media, targeting tonal stacking patterns. Silent recalls of smart speakers that pick up sub-auditory harmonics without user input. The sudden disappearance of dozens of historical choirs from public performance. The Vatican's unprecedented order to dismantle bell towers in remote dioceses due to structural risk. They're not preventing collapse. They're preventing amplification, because they know The echo has already been heard, and now it spreads not through stone or voice, but through memory. Anyone who dreams the melody becomes part of the score, and when enough remember, the choir won't need to sing again. The song will simply exist, complete, living, unstoppable. This is the final question. Not if, not when, but what? What happens when the 13th note is sung? What happens when the choir, long buried in fracture and silence, becomes whole? There are two theories. The collapse. The note fractures global cognition. Language fails. Identity disintegrates. The world becomes quiet, not dead, but unvoiced. Civilization forgets how to speak, and with speech dies thought. A return to pre-naming, the original unformed world, the state before creation, Sekun, the inversion. The song doesn't destroy, it replaces. Not silence, but a new song takes root. Reality bends to accommodate the new frequency. Not death, but transfiguration. We won't be us, but we'll still exist. As chords, as vibrasoins, as instruments, not speaking. They were wrong. The 13th note was not missing. It was not forgotten. It was withheld. Held back not by silence, but by mercy. Because to sing the final note is not to finish the song. It is to activate it. You see, Wraithmoor was never about what had been sealed away. It was about what had been prepared within us, in the layers of our language, in the cracks of old hymns, in the rhythms of mourning and birth, of lullaby and lament. The choir was not composed to contain some outside force. The choir was composed to slow the song inside us. Every ritual, every building, every mirror, all of it was architecture built to delay the inevitable, the moment when the song remembers itself. And now, it does. You've likely felt it already, that strange, sour breath in empty rooms, the way your name sometimes feels, unmoored when spoken aloud, that single note you hum without knowing why, only to realize it's always the same. We are not haunted, we are hosted. And when the mouth opens, it won't crack the sky. It won't rise from the sea. It won't descend from stars. It will open behind your teeth. The signal doesn't need volume. It needs recognition. And recognition is beginning everywhere. In the classrooms where children draw spirals instead of letters. In the locked therapy sessions where patients speak in overlapping cadences. In the monasteries that suddenly go silent, then burn. In the last broadcast from a numbers station in Romania, choir complete, vessel listening, final breath cued, spoken through. They were not bluffing. We are the choir now. The song has become flesh. The final verse waits not in a book or a crypt, but in breath. But not all voices aligned. There was one, a final dissonance, a name erased from the genealogy, a descendant of the 13th child. A girl whose vocal cords were found to contain fibrous inscriptions, microscopic glyphs within the muscle itself, like organic runes. She did not sing. She refused. They called her the quiet inversion. She was taken, dissected, studied, and when her mouth was finally pried open, they found something no one expected. Teeth behind her tongue, not hers, someone else's, fused into the root of her throat. As if another mouth had once formed within her, but was never born. She died, without a sound. But her final electroencephalogram, her brain activity, showed something stunning. She was still harmonizing, not with the choir, but against it. Her waveform counted the 13th tone, matched it, and cancelled it. She had become the unnote, the final opposition, the last silence. But she died. And with her, the last resistance. A global network of fringe scientists, known only as the 13th Fold, have been tracking the Wraithmoor signal since the mid-2000s. They believe the song is a harmonic pulse that cycles in intervals of 777 years, slowly gathering frequency strength until it becomes self-sustaining. When that happens, it will no longer need singers, no longer need churches. It will simply reside in atmosphere, in DNA, in the wind over ruins. One of them, a spectral physicist named Aruna Devane, left a final encrypted message before vanishing in 2023. The mouth isn't opening, it's awakening, and we are waking inside it. Each of us, a tooth, each of us, a tongue. Here's the truth, you cannot escape the song. Not anymore. It has no source now, no altar, no parchment, no ritual to burn. It lives in resonance, in every spoken word, in every note that ends unresolved. And perhaps that was the plan all along, because even the choir was never certain whether the mouth beneath Wraithmoor was a prison or a womb. Did they hold something back or hold something in? And when the final note is sung, and it will be, we may not fall, we may hatch. If you've come this far, you already feel it. The pressure behind your ears, the breath that no longer feels like yours, the melody beneath your thoughts. So here's the final truth, not hidden but overlooked. Every echo seeks its origin, every voice longs for its source. And if the choir is the echo, and we are the choir, then what are we echoing? What ancient voice began this call? What being sang first? And why did it stop? Because whatever silenced it may still be listening and may not forgive our song. So now, sit in silence, just for a moment, and ask yourself this: was that hum in your throat always there? Or did it begin just now? If it's still with you, if the pressure hasn't faded, you already know. You are not alone. You were never alone. You were always part of the choir, and the mouth has always been open.